How do you fail forward and land on your feet? And yes, I said fail forward, not fall forward. We are going to speak with Bryan Power in just a few minutes. But first, I am Traci Poe, the host of the Communicate Great podcast. Welcome. If you have not subscribed, hit subscribe, hit the notifications, share, comment, all of the things. So, we like to give people tips and tricks to level up their communication, and we bring on guests. So, Bryan is here today to give us some great tips. But before we get into his tips, I want Bryan to have a chance to introduce himself, tell you who he is, what he does, and then I have a couple of questions for him before we get into his tips. So, Bryan, take it away.
Traci, thanks so much for having me on your show today. I'm excited to be here and talk about how we can fail forward, right? So, yeah, yeah, a little bit about me. Kind of grew up in the '70s, right? As a child of the '70s with my mom with two kids, two boys, and kind of had a tumultuous childhood, which really kind of set the tone for my later adult life, and would play out in a really kind of a crazy way in 2024, and ultimately kind of what brought me here and taught me how to actually fail. I failed forward, and that's why I'm here to share that idea and that concept. And hopefully people will resonate with that. But it was a crazy journey, and I've learned how to fail forward. I want to share that with you guys today. So hopefully we can help some people.
Okay, let's kind of give a little bit of a tip or a hint on what failing forward is. So, one of the things that you talk about with people is attachment style. And so, from talking about that, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Um, I want you to tie in for people what attachment styles are and how you mentioned when you were a child, your childhood, how that plays into childhood and just how much power that can have without giving your tips, how much power that can have on us as adults in the way that we communicate with other people.
Yeah, so I learned a lot about the attachment styles last year when my wife and I were kind of going through a situation, right? And what I found out was that the attachment styles are basically been around since attachment theory has been around since like the '70s for the most part. It was created kind of a little bit earlier, but really took some ground in the '70s, and it's kind of been really popular now. Here we are in 2025, pretty popular again today. But it's really how we attach in our relationships to really anybody. We think about it as our spouse, but it's really sometimes with our parents, our friends, our family, everything else. It's kind of how we interact with people in relationship to them. And there's four major attachment styles. Number one is the healthy one. It's the secure attachment style, and that's the one we all aspire to be. They typically handle their emotions very well. They're very good at communicating. They know how to communicate in a pretty good fashion. They enjoy relationships are important to them. Their emotions are controlled though. So if the relationship were to end or something, they're going to feel the pain a little bit, but they're not going to be overwhelmed by it, type of thing. They'll kind of move on and kind of deal with that. And they just have that balance that I think we're all looking for. Fortunately, most of us are not going to fall in that category. We're going to fall in one of the other three categories, which are number one, you have your anxious, preoccupied attachment style. They typically have really important connection. They love to connect with people, sometimes almost codependent, right, where we're connecting too much, but very very much so the connection is number one, right? And it's a lot of times they're outgoing, they're fun, they're friendly, they're all these things, but a lot of times they'll people please too much, and forget themselves a little bit. But they certainly value the relationship is number one. Number on the flip side of that is what's called a dismissive avoidant, and dismissive avoidance will typically have a harder time connecting to their emotions, their feelings a little bit compared to say an anxious preoccupied. But with that, they typically like a lot of space. They typically need time to process. When you talk about trying to communicate with a dismissive avoidant, sometimes they're not ready to communicate, and they may need some time to figure that out and sort through it before they're willing to talk at all. So that was an important lesson that I learned the hard way. And then in the middle of that is kind of what's called the fearful avoidant. Fearful avoidance will swing between a little anxious and a little bit dismissive, depending upon the relationship sometimes, but they can definitely go back and forth a little bit. And they typically they like a lot of straightforward communication, but their emotions are all over a little bit. Sometimes they're very close to you, they feel very connected, and then maybe the next week they're almost breaking up with you, or you're fighting over something that seems immaterial. And and just trying to understand that sometimes can be very difficult. And what I learned is that because of the way our brains work and the way we've kind of perceived things through our childhood, and we've developed these patterns. A lot of times, the way we're trying to communicate to each other really becomes an issue, and it becomes a problem because we don't understand sometimes the way they're thinking, their thoughts are going, and then how do we kind of deal with that? I always say, if I'm talking English and you're talking Chinese, we may be trying to say the same thing, but if we're not on the same page, we don't understand how to do that, then we're never going to connect and make that work. So that's the challenge, is how do we do that? And I'm still in the process of learning. I've come a long way with that, but hopefully we can share some tips of what we've learned here so far. But that's kind of a basic rundown.
Okay, I would just like to say, and I know a little bit about attachment styles, a little bit, but I can imagine the depth with which you could study the attachment styles and learn about all four of these categories. I'm guessing is probably pretty massive. So you just hit on the very, very tip
Yeah.
of the massive iceberg when it comes to, this idea of attachment styles. So you said something earlier that gave hope. And you basically said, things were going wrong in 2024 and you managed to fail forward because you were learning about these attachment styles. So the first thing I want to say is there is hope, right? There is hope in whatever is going on. So let me ask you something. You also mentioned number one is the healthy one, and we can all aspire to be that. So for instance, love languages, I talk about those a lot. Your love language can change over the years. And I recommend for people to take that assessment every few years just to see if you're the same or if you've changed, right? And the people around you. So my question is on the attachment styles, is that something that is locked into you because it was nurtured into you from when you were a small child, or can you break free of the negative, unhealthy styles? Tell us about that.
But yeah, 100%, you can absolutely break free from this. Okay. And that's the goal. I've actually, I'm working towards this myself, becoming more and more secure. And I feel like I'm, getting made a lot of progress here, but absolutely, you can absolutely go from, being one of these, really dismissive or anxious or fearful, avoidant type of behaviors. And a lot of it just has to do with our core wounds that we've developed. Again, we talk about sometimes through childhood. A lot of times they are developed there, but they can develop, really throughout our entire lives. But essentially, we've picked up some trauma along the way, and we've learned these patterns in our brain subconsciously, and these subconscious patterns are talking to us in ways that we don't always see or understand, but we develop them. And so the key is to really kind of learn what they are. What are the wounds? What is my subconscious really telling me? You talk about communication. We have to tap into that and say, sometimes there may be a situation going on, and subconsciously I may be thinking, oh well, this person's going to leave me. I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be, nobody's going to ever love me. Nobody's going to ever want to be with me. I'm not good enough. And that's the subconscious talking to me in ways that are now negative, that are actually destroying my relationships. And that's how we develop some of these unfortunate, coping mechanisms, and we can fall into those attachment styles. But yeah, we can actually heal those and learn how to overcome them, and change our behaviors. And I love what Thais Gibson's work has done for me. That's she created what's called integrated attachment theory, and that really is the 6 elements of the integrated attachment theory program. Does just that. It begins to heal the attachment styles and begins to help us, understand them, improve them, change them, and get to that secure point. And that's the work that she's done, and I'm a big fan of hers. And that's why I've become a coach myself, where I try to teach people the program and try to help them through that, so that we can get to the secure side, and enjoy our lives a little bit more, not have the drama.
Right. Okay. So here's what I want to point out, and I'll do a little commercial for you.
Yeah.
You're my guest, so I'm going to do a little commercial. Here's the deal. Like, you didn't just experience this and learn, like, oh, this is a thing. Let me learn about myself. You took it way past personal integration and learning about it just to help you in your marriage, right? And you and your relationships with everybody around you. You took it to a different level, that you went on to really study it, to learn it, to know it, and to know how to turn around and help other people. So I just want to make that distinction very clear. This is not just something that you did, you learned, you moved on, you thought, wow, like this is life changing. And I'm guessing that was kind of your thought process. This is life changing. I want to help other people. So I'm guessing that's kind of what you were thinking.
Yeah, you nailed it. Just a quick story. My wife and I in 2024, we went from having what I thought was a pretty decent relationship. Some minor issues, parenting styles were different, little arguments here and there, but nothing that I thought would have, caused a complete failure and breakdown and ultimately a breakup, if you will. But in early 2024, we began to have some fights again about my son. She challenged me to see a therapist because she thought I had all the issues, which I agreed to say, hey, you know what, I'll go to a therapist and learn. I'm happy to see what I can do to learn. But I also challenged her to go see a therapist because I believed that she had a lot of issues, right? And so we both, and that's the first thing I learned is that we have to take ownership of our own stuff. We always think it's the other person. And it's always them that's they're the problem, and it's not, it's both, it takes two, right? But we definitely have to take ownership of our side. I can't take ownership of her side, she needs to do that, right? So we began to take ownership with of that. We were seeing some therapists and working through some problems, but all of a sudden our childhood trauma really started to play out, and a lot of these fights, a lot of the disagreements, the things that we were kind of going through, the emotional charge began to really take shape, and it became an emotional battle for 4 months, to the point where she would ultimately seek a restraining order on me for safety reasons, for emotional safety. Not There was never a physical threat. It was only for emotional safety. But emotionally, we were so distorted at that point. We had so many issues. It was brutal. But at that point, I realized, you know what, it's over. I kind of accepted that relationship maybe just can't be fixed here. I didn't know what to do. So I was kind of done with it. But I was fortunate enough to come across the integrated attachment theory program from Tice Gibson about a month before the restraining order came about. And so I kind of was delving into that work. I was fascinated by her work. She has a really great podcast on Mel Robbins does a podcast, and she does a really good hour and a half almost video about explaining the attachment styles. I highly recommend that for you. Look on YouTube for that. But that's the one that really spurred me on. And I thought, man, there's some real good stuff in here. I want to learn this stuff. I just want to figure it out. I knew that I would have a good relationship with somebody else at some point. I wanted to just prepare myself for that, heal myself, and move forward with the information. And I just got obsessed with it, if you will, to the point where, yeah, I just like, you know what, I want to be a coach. I want to help others do this. And I'm still learning every day, but I've come so far from what I did before. I was fortunate enough to, as I learned this, my wife and I would be ultimately kind of had the opportunity to put it back together.
Hmm.
And I was shocked. I wasn't ready for that. But because of some of the work that I had done and the work that she had been doing, we were able to kind of turn this thing around. And now we share an incredible relationship today where we have a lot more tools in our belt, relationship tools, different ways that we handle ourselves, our lives, our communication skills. All this stuff has worked to improve our relationship. And that's the hope I want to give people. And hopefully we can get you to the point where I'm at today, because I want people to, feel this type of, excitement and joy with your partner, and be able to have these tools that can help you get to that point.
Yes. And so I'm glad that I did a commercial and you kind of filled the commercial in, because at the end, don't let me forget, I want you to let our audience know how they can reach you if they want to learn more about this or working with you. Let's get into your first tip. What do you have for us?
Well, my first tip is always, and it's the one that I learned the hard way, is never communicate when you're triggered, right? And so when you're in a heightened emotional state, that heightened emotional state, you've got to take some time away. Okay, any communication that happens right there is not going to turn out to be a good thing. So however long it takes to get emotionally regulated, then that's where you got to take. And I think it's important to tell the other person that we need that space. All right. So, in other words, a lot of times my wife would pull away. We'd start to talk and have a little fight. And she would pull away. And then when she pull away without communicating to me, like, hey, I want to revisit this. I don't hate you. I'm not mad at you. I just need some time. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. So I would panic. And that was part of the problem that we were having. So, don't communicate when you're triggered, but let the other person know, hey, I'm feeling a little bit emotional right now. I don't think this is a good time for us to talk. I wanted to revisit this, but can we do this at a later time when we're both maybe a little bit more emotionally regulated? And then just take that time. If it's an hour or two, it's an hour or two. If it's a day or two, it's a day or two. It's better to just wait and give that other person some time. But I think it's important to communicate that we need that time, and that I do want to revisit this because this is important. So the other person knows, like, okay, we're going to get a chance to talk about this. Let's just put it on the shelf for now. And then, of course, do that later on, and actually come back to that. So that practice of like revisiting is important. And then when you do that, you realize, okay, yeah, I don't have to always have that communication right away. And it is sometimes better to give it some time. But again,
Yeah.
communicate all that together. Yeah, that's my number
Yeah.
one, is definitely do not communicate when you're
When
emotionally charged. Yeah, it never ends up well.
yeah, I agree with that. So two things. Yeah, and communicate. I need a minute. I need some space, right? Like I'll get back to you kind of a thing. Definitely communicate that. But I'm curious, and I don't, if you want to share, share. If not, sorry, I asked, but what was your attachment style back when you first started studying it?
Yeah, I mean, so I always felt like I was pretty secure, and that's what I say now is, oh, we're all secure until the crap hits the fan, right? And so
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
things started to really devolve, I started having my abandonment wounds came out full. They were game on. I was feeling like I was losing my family here. I didn't know what I was going to do. I felt unsafe. I didn't know how this was going to end. And it really triggered my wounds there. And I was leaning a lot more anxious, preoccupied at that point. I am more fearful avoidant, and I do feel, as a fearful avoidant, we can lean anxious or we can lean dismissive a lot of times. I was definitely leaning a lot more anxious. My wife is leaning a lot more dismissive, and so that's what triggered us a little bit. But yeah, once that really started to go, my wounds showed its ugly head. That subconscious came out, and it really delved into something really crazy. But I learned a lot because I learned that the subconscious, it really speaks to us, and we need to listen because our subconscious is telling us things that if we can't get conscious about them, we're missing that communication, and it really is disastrous. So we definitely got to get in tune with what are the wounds, what am I telling myself subconsciously, so that I can start to tap into that, because that's affecting what's going on in my life and how I'm perceiving everything and how I'm kind of reacting to everything, and the emotional state that I find myself in. It all comes from those beliefs and thoughts that I'm telling myself internally.
And I would say I am a huge proponent of analyzing yourself, because if you don't take the time to learn all of these different things, there's no growth, right? And your relationships around you are going to suffer. And so here's my next question before you get into tip 2, and I hope I'm not taking something from what you're about to say, but when you have, for instance, I mentioned the love languages a minute ago, and when you have two different love languages, you have to learn to speak the other person's language. You have to understand, more than that, how they interact with each other, right? So I would imagine the same with these attachment styles. You've got one person with one attachment style, another person probably with another attachment style. And when you have that in the mix, that can create some definite problems. And then what happens when you both have the same attachment style, especially if it's the avoidant one? Oh my goodness. So, yeah, there is so much to this. Okay, all right, go to your next one.
I mean, the next one that I always like to talk about is to really try to listen to understand, and not to just simply respond or defend. And that's something that I was doing really bad at, for so many years with my wife. Is, anytime she would try to, talk to me and I would feel criticized at all. I was always at that point listening to, respond and defend my position, let her know why she's wrong, and kind of like, what I mean. So I was ready to attack instead of like just listening to her to try to understand what she's really trying to share with me and everything. And so that was a huge one for me, and I learned that the hard way, because again, that first, I go back to that first fight we had in like early February, where we were talking about my son, and I had come home from work. I was tired. She wanted to talk about some things that my son was doing, and she was just frustrated and wanted to share with me. And because of my situation, I was tired. I had a little bit of a sore throat. I was like, hey, can we just talk about this another day? And she's like, no, I want to do this now. And I was like, oh, okay. But as soon as she got into it, I wasn't now listening to understand her at that point. I was totally just listening to say, okay, I wanted to point out why she was wrong, the way I've always done it. But now it's a totally different thing that we do now, is where we actually just, again, number one, we don't talk when we're triggered, so that's a good thing. But the second thing is, now when we do talk, we're actually listening to each other to try to understand. I don't feel threatened. I don't have to feel attacked by her, and vice versa. We can now just try to understand the other person, what they're trying to share with me, their heart, their feelings, their thoughts on this subject. And I really want to know my spouse, right? So I want to understand her as much as I possibly can. So I do want to listen to her, and I want to try to understand that. And so that's a huge one for me, is just listen to understand. I always say God gives us two ears and one mouth, right? I've heard that saying before. God gives us two ears and one mouth because we're supposed to listen twice as much as compared to how much we talk. But
Right. Okay, so talking about that, the listening to understand, that's a saying that so many of us have heard, but how often we just kind of dismiss it and we don't really think about, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? And listening is one of my favorite topics within the communication umbrella. And I don't know if I shared with you when we were talking before, a couple of weeks ago, whenever we connected, but here is my listening story. So, when I was working on my master's, I had one entire 16-week course on listening. And I go into it thinking, I got this. I'm a great listener.
Yeah.
And after that first class, I literally walked out to my car in tears because I realized how terrible of a listener I was.
Wow.
So I know that so many of us think, oh, we're a good listener. I'm a good listener, right? But
Right.
when you really get down to it, well, first of all, everybody can improve in everything. Nobody is perfect in anything. So there's always room for improvement. But so many of us think we're a good listener, but you are dead on. We are listening very often to like, oh, get our point and I'm going to win. And especially if you're a competitive person, you want to win. And I used to have a conversation with a couple of people and I would say to them, what is more important, the relationship or being right? And so if you are one of those people that's like, you gotta be right, you gotta win, I would caution you to really take stock of how you listen. What are you listening to do? To pound somebody or to truly understand? That listen to understand is huge. So don't just take it as a saying, like really think about what that means. So I love that that is one of your tips, Brian. I love
Yes,
that.
sometimes that comes from our core wounds, though. So sometimes we're listening to defend because I'm afraid you're going to leave me. I'm afraid if you find out that I'm not perfect, right? And so we're listening to defend because of our core wounds sometimes. So we got to heal those core wounds. That will help us become better listeners. And now we're listening more to understand. We don't feel as threatened once we kind of heal that. For me, again, it was a fear of abandonment, fear of like being alone or not being good enough, and all the
Yeah,
not being heard, stuff like that. So yeah, just when we heal that, we're able to have better conversations, and we are able to listen more to, again, really understand and not feel like I have to defend every little thing and try to be, yeah, defensive so that I'm scared that you're going to leave me. So once I get over that a
right.
little bit, I can relax and actually listen better. So it does help.
I like that you kind of reframed that. It's not always that somebody wants to win. That's just been the case with a couple of people in my life. They're very competitive and they are going to win. They want to win. And that's when I have to caution them. Wait, what is more important to you? This relationship with that person or you being right? So I like that you said, oh, but wait, there could be another reason that they are wanting to defend themselves. And so I really like that you brought that up. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Anything else on tip number two? You want to ready to go to three?
I'm ready to go to three. Before that, though, I do want to say this, that the one thing that my wife and I have practiced now, and maybe this is number three, number four, I don't know, but I want to mention it because it's so valuable, it's so important. In the past, we would have these conversations and we would just shoot them at each other. Again, sometimes in a triggered state, everything like that. One of the things that have made a major difference for us is learning how to hold space for each other. So maybe this is number three. Okay, so we do something called holding space, where we can sit down on the couch, and I look her in the eye for 5 or 10 minutes and completely uninterrupted. She gets to speak for that time. And again, that whole time I'm listening to understand. Okay. And I'm not jumping in. I'm not, and I was always jumping in the past. Right. So I'm now listening for that 5 or 10 minutes just to understand her. And then when she's done, I then get to go and share my piece, my feelings on the situation, my thoughts on everything. And it's not like I don't have to agree with everything she says. She doesn't have to agree with everything I say. We get to speak our truth, and that other person just listens to hear and understand. And that's a whole game changer to me. That alone has been probably one of the biggest things that's helped my wife and I, is that practice of holding space, and being able to just listen without trying to jump in between and crossing that boundary, if you will. That's been a game changer because I was really bad at that before, and I've certainly got a lot better at it now. And I would say that that's a huge one. It takes a little practice at first. It's a little awkward at first doing it, but the more you do it, the more you'll get more comfortable with it, and you'll realize that it works, and it actually begins to make a difference. And you're like, "Ooh, wait a second, this is a great way," especially when you're having serious conversations about serious subjects. Okay, I'm not talking the little stuff. I'm talking the important issues. whatever it is, maybe your kids, your family, whatever's going on, those are the times when you really need to sit and listen and learn from each other and have the opportunity to kind of, not be interrupted and stuff. That's a big one.
Right. And then I would say, I would add to that, kind of what you bounced off of, that listening to understand. Man, that is a great opportunity when you're holding space for somebody. That is a great opportunity to put into practice, like what you were saying. You're listening and you're not trying to jump in. It's a great place to practice that, listening to understand. And so let me ask you, in this process, the way you do it, because I do it one way, or when my kids were at home and we were, we're empty nesters now, but when we were family, we would do certain things. And your process, when you talk about holding space, do you then allow, so let's say your wife is speaking and you're listening, do you follow that up with a round of questions for her to draw out more information to understand deeper, or is it your turn to talk? How do you work that out?
I mean, it can be. It can be. Yeah. There's no. Yeah. When it's my turn to talk, I can certainly ask some questions. I think what we typically find ourselves doing more than anything is that 5 or 10 minutes she gets to share. Then I'm going to share that 5 or 10 minutes back, and then it's probably going to swing back to her for another 5 or 10, and
Right.
then back to me. So it does become a little bit more of that conversational, and that's where some of those questions will ultimately get answered and asked, along the way. So when I'm done with my 5 or 10 minutes, yeah, I may say, hey, by the way, can you clarify X, or can you, share your thoughts on this, right?
Love
And
it.
so, and then I'll give her that next 5 or 10 minutes. But when she's speaking, I'm not jumping over her. I'm now trying to give her a real chance to answer, even if it hurts a little bit, even if it doesn't, even if I want to sit there and go, I don't think that's true, I don't think that's right, but I've got to bite my tongue a little bit and say, okay, wait a second, let me hear that, even if I don't agree 100%. Yeah, I just want to hear what her thoughts are, so that, and then I get my chance. So yeah, it tends to flow more like that, 5 or 10 minutes, and then the questions are answered, and then it's kind of back and forth a little bit until we get a pretty good resolution. And sometimes, sometimes you can still get triggered. And when that does happen, when we're doing that, we'll just, hey, look, why don't we just put this on the shelf a little bit and let's come back at another time. So it's not like when we're doing that, it's always perfect. Sometimes we do get a little emotional, and hey, you know what, I'm going to need a few minutes, and maybe we can come back and revisit again. So just keep that in mind, that just because you're doing it that way doesn't mean that it doesn't trigger some emotion sometimes. And it's okay to step back again if you need to and revisit again.
And I can imagine that once you start doing this, and you said it takes time to really learn it, and I know that you keep learning, but I would imagine, and from our personal experience, my personal experience, the more you do this activity, this exercise, this holding space, the more that those wounds start to heal. And so then this time that you have of holding space for each other just becomes deeper and richer and more productive. I'm guessing that's been your experience.
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, for me, I have a deep fear of, like, one of my wounds is like being unheard, right? And so, or being misunderstood. And so I will tend to repeat myself a lot, or I'll tend to get a little bit louder so that you're going to hear me, right? If I feel unheard, I'm going to talk in certain ways that try to get my voice heard. So by repeating or getting more loud, or again, feeling misunderstood, I may repeat myself several times. My wife laughs at me because she knows that's just my MO sometimes. But that's me. And that's through my childhood. Sometimes maybe I just didn't have my voice heard the way I felt like it needed to be. Nobody understood me. And so I just learned that pattern of how to do that. And when you're not sitting face to face and having that moment, it's, you tend to go into that zone. But by doing this exercise, I absolutely feel way more understood. I absolutely feel way more heard, right? And so I don't have to repeat as many times and have the conversation develop like that. So it's just so much more enjoyable, pleasurable, and when you realize it's working, you can get excited about it and start to go, "Wow, wait a why not do it this way?" Like
Yes,
this
yes,
works. Like, let's do that.
yes,
It's working. Let's do that. And so my
yeah,
wife and I make a good practice of, anytime we have a serious subject that we need to talk about, hey, we'll sit down and let's look face to face and let's do it. And it's just, it comes more second nature to us now. So, but yeah, it's a great exercise. And yes, it will help heal some of those wounds. And like I said, like for me, again, just being heard, it's good stuff.
yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that you talk that about that as one of your tips. Okay, all right. What is your next tip?
Well, another tip that I'm still practicing is always, reframing in the I statements, right? And so, a lot of times we tend to want to point a finger and say, "Well, you never do this," or "You make me feel like this way," and Instead, what I've learned is like, you know what, for instance, let's just say, hey, when you don't pick up the clothes off the bedroom floor, I feel unloved. I feel, disrespected, or I feel, a certain way, right? And so it's not saying, well, you don't pick up the clothes off the floor, you never do this, and you make me feel like a loser. You make me, yeah, that's a negative way to do it. But when we can reframe it a little bit, I do find that it lands a little bit softer, right? And it's somebody's gonna be able to say that, oh, wait a second, so you're not telling me that you don't love me when I'm saying that, right? Because sometimes maybe the other person's, when you're doing it the other way, they feel unloved, but if I'm saying, no, you know what, when you don't do this, it makes me feel this way, or when you do this, it makes me feel this way. So that's also a good thing, right? So I'm positive, hey, when you do pick up the clothes off the floor, I feel amazing, I feel cherished, I feel loved, I feel respected, and I really appreciate it when you do that, because it just makes me feel all good inside, right? So that's a whole lot better way than saying, can you just please pick up your clothes off the floor, you're killing me, whatever, right? You start getting into the zones.
Right. So one of the things that I do with Communicate Great is I work with on a very limited capacity because I do so many things. But one of the things I do is work with groups. And this is what we talk about. One of the sessions is the I statements versus the you statements. And people are so used to launching into people, you always, you never kind of a thing, that when you work with them on this technique, it's hard, right? I remember when I first learned it, I thought, oh dear. So for me, it's always a lot of fun. I give them scenarios and then I say, practice it. And you can just see them like really trying to get it done.
Yeah.
So that is a great technique. I love that you brought that one up.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's definitely one that's been impactful for me. And so, again, learning how to do these things, all these little things add up. When you're doing a little this, little that, little this, little that, all of a sudden you look back and go, wow, wait a second. We're doing things way different than we did before. And it's actually working in a much better capacity. And we're enjoying ourselves more. We're feeling more complete, more understood, more loved, more cherished. All those other things come along with it because, being able to communicate properly, this is honestly the key. I always laugh because how many people say the relationship broke up because of poor communication, and I always feel like it's not because we don't want to communicate properly. A lot of times it's just we don't have the tools necessary to do it the right way, and we're talking the wrong language to each other. We're kind of just butting heads, and that's sometimes unfortunate. But these tools are game changers, for any relationship when we do it, and not just your spouse. You're talking your parents, your friends, your coworkers, your brothers, sisters. It really can work with anybody. So it just again takes practice.
That you talked about that it's not just your spouse, because again, this is why I'm so passionate about communication, because the level with which we can communicate in a healthy way determines the health of our relationships. And people sometimes just don't get it and they think, oh, something's off, but they don't necessarily stop to look at their communication skills. So it is, you've said a couple times, game changer, and so much of this is a game changer. So I love that you're bringing these tips. Okay. Anything else about that one? Do you have another tip?
No, that's a solid, that's a good one there. Yeah, I definitely suggest implementing that as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So no more tips for us today. That's it.
I mean, you got some little tips, that can help. Like I've learned, like putting your phone down when somebody's talking to you is important, right? So paying attention and those types of things sometimes could just, little stuff like that, or sometimes just validating somebody else's feelings is important, right? So clarifying is good. So when somebody's, I want to make sure that I heard this properly, right? So before I maybe make a statement, sometimes I clarify, hey, I just want to make sure that I heard this right. Is that something I just want to hear, you know what I mean? So I like to clarify stuff like that. But those are my main ones. I think a lot of the
Yeah.
other ones fall within those, three or four. And those are other little things that we could do that can help us along the way. But there's a lot to this stuff, right? Learning how to communicate. I always say it's like, again, it's like if I'm talking English and you're unfortunately talking, say, Chinese, we may want to say the same thing, but we don't know how to speak the same language, and we're just butting heads now. So we've got to learn how to speak properly and do this in a much healthier way, and you'll find that it really does come together and change the dynamics of any relationship. This is one tool of the six that we actually learned, but it's definitely a vital one and an important one of the six, integrated attachment theory pillars, if you will, of the program. But communication is a huge one.
Okay. So if communication and learning how to communicate in an effective and healthy way is one out of six things that you go
Yeah.
over, my goodness. It
Yeah.
goes deep, deep, deep. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So before we close out, I'm remembering, hey, let our audience know how they can reach you. And we will put this in the show notes, but just kind of give a verbal, somebody's driving, listening, whatever.
Yeah.
Just let our audience know how they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you want to learn more about my story and some of the integrated attachment theory stuff that we do, you can go to my website at makeyourrelationshipfail.com or myrelationshipfail.com. And the whole premise with that is obviously we're not looking to make relationships fail. We want to learn the tools necessary to not make them fail. But sometimes failure is part of the process. We unfortunately kind of find ourselves in a bad situation. And that's when we typically are willing to learn more and kind of get it going. That's what happened to me. And now we kind of play on that a little bit and have a little fun with that. But no matter what your situation is with your spouse, your family, wherever you are, if you're in a, maybe the beginning stages where you're having some fights and arguments, learn how to do this stuff now before it gets too late. And it does go down the road into a bad path. But if, God forbid, you find yourself in a really bad spot, I just want you to know that there is hope and you can learn this stuff and you can change the dynamics of your relationship with anybody. And maybe it's your spouse coming back to you like mine did. We were able to kind of work on this together, or maybe it is, maybe if that one does just kind of go that way, but at least you can heal yourself and move forward. And I promise you, you're going to have another opportunity to have a good relationship with somebody. So get prepared and do the right things and learn some of these techniques and heal a little bit so you can do that. And anything can happen. So yeah, just go to my website, myrelationshipfail.com or makeyourrelationshipfail.com. You can connect with me. I always challenge my people to join the personal development school through my website. Which is Thais Gibson's work. Okay. And then once we do that, there's a treasure trove of stuff in there. And you can learn on your own and grow from there. Or if you decide to, if you feel like you need a little extra push and a little extra somebody in your corner, you want to work with me one-on-one, I'd be happy to kind of coach you through the program so we can get move the needle a little bit faster for you. But either way, that's the best way to get in touch with me. And I want you guys to get this stuff as much as possible so you can really begin this journey and learn how to communicate great so we can have great lives. And that's something that I've learned, and my life is 1,000 times better today because of the a lot of the things that I've learned. And communication, I would say, is it's certainly up there on the list as one of the most important things that I've learned to change. And so I'm very grateful for the experience. And it's it's unfortunate I had to go down the bad path to get here, but I'm so glad that I have, and I'm blessed for it. So thank you for all the work that you do, and I hope that your audience will listen more and certainly kind of learn how to communicate great. So
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for bringing to us this information on attachment styles, because please understand, audience, that how you were nurtured, the things, your experiences, your field of experiences you were younger, definitely impact and shape who you are today. And if you're thinking what's going on, it could very much be an issue of attachment styles in your relationships with different people. So, yes, please go check out Bryan and learn more about the work that he does. And again, thank you, Bryan, for bringing this to us. Again, I love communication. I love the power that it gives people. And so thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for bringing us this information and some good food for thoughts and the good tips. So, all right, everybody, we'll see you next time. Thanks.
bye bye. Thank you, Traci.